Now, when you look at the Ministry of Education and its current leadership in Angie, I think Angie has failed.
Mayor Angie says that the education system is doing well and they're making progress. Is she telling the truth or is she lying?
That one is mad. It's complete lunacy that Angie thinks that our education system is doing well.
Mr. Maimane, what is the state of the South African education system?
Education in this country is in an absolute crisis. We are building an education system that will deliver young people who are unemployed and unemployable. The reality of it is that the state is such that if you've got money in this country, you'll be able to get a good education. And if you don't have money, you're going to have an education that is comparable to Bantu education, and ultimately means our young people are not competitive globally.
Why are you passionate about this particular topic? Some politicians speak about land, other politicians speak about, immigration. Why is this passion policy area for you?
If we don't fix our education system, South Africa cannot move up the developmental curve. Countries that have been able to succeed have succeeded on the back of educating their citizens. And you can look at countries like Japan, South Korea, and even countries in Africa. When I think about Kenya and their investment in education, you can see it's bearing fruit. The fact is South Africa needs to be able to build a skills model, but actually more crucially and more morally, I think when you miseducate your citizens, you effectively enslave them mentally. What true freedom is people who are educated to exercise choice, which means they can compete, live anywhere, contribute, and know that that's one aspect government cannot control or take away from you.
So let's talk about some of the elements that you've really pushed hard on social media and other places. Let's start with the pass mark. Currently, the pass mark is either 30% or 40%, depending on what they're evaluating. Why do you want to have one pass mark or 50% going up? Why does that matter?
It matters because ultimately the judgment of proficiency can never be benchmarked at 30%. You can't say a student only knows 3 out of 10 of what they're meant to be proficient in. And secondly, it ensures that from an educator's point of view, you're lifting the standards in the classroom to ensure that all your learners are able to compete at a much higher level. We've found that if you set the bar low, people find ways to keep it lower and lower. Whereas if you keep increasing it, you ensure that the quality of what goes on in there is improved. And then lastly, for international standards and benchmarking, you are never going to ask your young people to compete once they are if they pass mathematics at, for argument's sake, 30%, or they pass science or any of the technical and technology subjects at 30%. It means that they can't hook on to other aspects on an international benchmarking level. So to me, it is a fundamental issue of ensuring that the quality of learning, the quality of outputs is improved.
But some people would say that, 50% is not for everyone, 30% can cater to some people who are not that orientated to maybe maths or science. What would you say in response to that?
It's absolute nonsense. It's an insult to our young people. I think our young people are talented. I think that our young people are capable. And ultimately, even in my upbringing, in the worst education system in the country, you're compelled to have to get over 50% if you're going to pass. And ultimately, if the standards are set at that, you go after it, you pursue it. So to say that it's not for everybody, 30% is not for everybody. It cannot be that we assume that all kids can only get 30%. That's a fallacy. We've got to ensure that actually all kids are capable of getting 50%. Give them the right teachers, give them teachers who are competent, give them the best start, ensure that they can come into the education system. Our young people are capable.
And let's talk about life orientation. Last year you spoke about scrapping life orientation, and some people say, no, but it's a good subject. It helps with sex education and, some of the mental well-being, educational elements. Why do you want to scrap life orientation, and what comes in its place?
So when we understand where societies are all over the world and where South Africa is relative to that, we're entering into a space where there's an economic transition, which means where people are going to work, live, and play is going to be different. Secondly, the nature of skills that you need for that are different to what I was raised with, etc. Because the next generation of kids are going to need critical skills. They're going to need critical reasoning and thinking skills. And so therefore, as the economy transitions, then one of the major purposes of education in its extrinsic value is how do we align education and its economic or social outputs. Therefore, I don't think at this current point in time, life orientation achieves that as a start. Secondly, no one takes it seriously. And thirdly, its assessment criteria is poor in that kids can show up and pretty much run around the field and they are deemed proficient in life orientation. It is not helpful. Let's replace it with subjects that focus on critical thinking, and let's allow young people to be able to compete and be prepared for a coming digital and fifth industrial revolution economy so that young people can compete in that space.
Yeah, I think I'm persuaded a lot by this scrapping of life orientation, because when you think about the amount of academic content that exists just in thinking, systems analysis, logic, if you look at a variety of frameworks of thought, I don't think that LO as designed right now actually caters to that. And I think there's other spaces where you can teach physical education, and also teach sex education and deal with some of the mental health care challenges that exist. But I do think that there's a need now.
I mean, one of the things that has sadly become the case is that we're running out of good and competent teachers. So life orientation is a response to that problem, in that now you align, you go, well, if you were a soccer coach, here are the players I've got, now I'm going to make sure their ability to play is weak and not great. Whereas if we begin to esteem higher the caliber of teachers, ask our teachers to say, here's the developmental plan, here's the training that we need, we are then able to bring educators into the classroom who can take the conversation to that very issue of systems thinking. How do we ensure that young people are prepared for the future? So I think one of the things that we failed at as a country, not only in the educating of our young people, but it's the improvement of the quality of teacher who sits in the classroom itself.
So on that was going to be my next question about the teachers. You've spoken about how you want to increase remuneration for teachers, change basically how government interacts with teachers. You've said online that, teachers are not respected in South Africa. Why do you want to increase teacher pay? What do we get out of that? And in general, what kind of a new approach do you think is necessary for engaging with teachers from a government perspective?
I think one of the tools, at least of measuring and ensuring that competitiveness remains, is how you remunerate people. It's true for many other different systems. And where you pay your remuneration is not only the value you give to that profession, but it's also the kind of person you're going to attract to that profession. If we pay people badly, we're going to attract people who, in that aspect, want to be remunerated like that. Now, what we need in this country is to be able to say, we esteem teaching. We give it dignity, and we want the best to be in teaching. Therefore, especially in crucial subjects, we have to be remunerating better, because practically, having worked in a school, having been in the classroom, and we're losing skilled teachers because they end up having to go work in the private sector for salaries that are not that much more higher, but they just give them the sense of being able to work, etc., and do other things. You end up with teachers selling copiers, printers, all of those things, whereas they should be in the classroom educating our young people. And furthermore, I do think that once we've esteemed it and given it the right dignity and the competitiveness, we can ensure that broadly, young people today aspire to be lifelong teachers, because they see not only can they build their career on it, but they're able to work for the next generation and break the curse of intergenerational poverty that they would come from.
Yeah, I think there is something to that, because a lot of people who are working in corporate South Africa, if teacher salaries were competitive, would probably consider teaching as an option. The other thing I've always been bugged by is that in the universities, the number of APS scores to get into education is significantly lower than the other faculties. And I think that shouldn't be the case. I think that it should be as hard to get into teaching as it is to get into engineering, as it is to get into, a BSc, for instance. And if you were to look at my university vets, that wasn't the case. What we were experiencing is that the threshold for getting into education was the lowest. And it seemed to me to be warped, because these are the people we are saying should be, taking things forward and be the best of the best. But that's a story for another day.
But the only point I want to add to that is you've also got to uphold the dignity of teachers by starting with the best Minister of Education.
Yeah.
Because the temperature, as one axiom says, is the speed of the leader is the speed of the team. Now, when you look at the Ministry of Education and its current leadership in Angie, I think Angie has failed. I think that she doesn't set the standards in education, and she herself, I'd certainly not hire her to teach my kids. So the frankness of the issue is that when you look at the broader education infrastructure itself, it attracts people who sometimes are not able to do the work that we require them to do. So we need the best leadership from the top.
What about unions? Are they an asset or liability?
The rights of workers must be protected, right? And the role of unions best be defined in that score. The dilemma that education unions have played is that because of their alliance with the ANC, they've ended up in what that report was called Jobs for Cash, capturing the education system, and at a lower level, capturing a school, picking who the headmaster is, and that headmaster is not there for the service of the school or the learners or the teachers, but for the union. That is an inhibitor role, and they've created a broadening workforce in education of teachers who believe their protection is not in delivering competent results, but in the union. So in this instance, they've become a hindrance towards a competent education system in this country. I would like to see the role of unions become ones of saying, what are the basic human rights of teachers, the labor rights be protected, but it cannot encroach into further areas of appointing headmasters and dictating how teachers are assessed. Still, the department must have the strength to be able to appoint who the best people are, assess them properly, and be freed from union interference in that sense.
My final question is around this idea of vouchers. Can you break down for us how you envision that? I understand it to be a form of charter schools. How do you envision that, and why is this something that you are saying that South Africans should think about?
Yeah, it should be in the mix of education, because at the end of the day, when I look at perhaps maybe a Quintile 5 school, which is a high fee paying school, or relative to some of the other schools that we've got, if the fees for that year, for argument's sake, were 30,000, or even ex-model C schools were such, what the department or what the state has are assets. They've got schools, they've got buildings, and many of those are in townships. Imagine if you said our contribution to this conversation of creating a learning infrastructure that could be a partnership between public and private is to give the asset, which is the building itself, contribute to the teacher's salary, and then give vouchers to the parents, so that now suddenly a fee of 30,000 would be split 3 ways, but the parents would have a voucher to be able to shop around and decide which are the best schools. One of the things you do is you enhance competition in those schools. Secondly, you ensure that they're properly funded so that you don't end up with schools with poor infrastructure. Progressively, thirdly, you've got a competitiveness which allows for the best teachers to work within the schools and can compete. And so you democratize education and make sure that it isn't the privilege of money, which is where we started. You actually empower. And remember, as a state, we're already spending about 13,000 Rand per learner per year. So if you were to voucherize that, you actually say to a parent who's maybe entering the middle class, etc., I've now got a voucher. I can supplement that with my own private income and can go shop around for a school wherever else I want, so that you don't create this environment where in the feeder school system or feeder area system, A child is located in a community where they've got very poor schools, and therefore they end up in a very poor school because it's a feeder area, and then you perpetuate separate development.
So you're basically trying to find a way to give that rural education to more people. Final question, because we're out of time. Angie Motshekga says that the education system is doing well and they're making progress. Is she telling the truth or is she lying?
That one is mad. It's complete lunacy that Angie Motshekga thinks that our education system is doing well. And on an objective measure, let's answer the question. For every, conservatively speaking, million learners who start school, what Angie Motshekga's education system will eventually deliver is that close to 400,000 of them will join the ranks of the unemployed at the end of that matric year continuously. Why? Because they pass at a lower level. If they eventually get to matric, if you disaggregate those who have dropped out, they pass at a lower level, and therefore they can't compete. They're not all going to end up at higher education centers. So what happens of them? Youth unemployment in this country is nearing of 2 out of 3 young people not being able to get jobs. So the proof of the education pudding, as I could say, is in the fact that youth unemployment in the country is higher than generally anywhere else in the world. And so if our education system was that good, that stat would not be reflective of that.
Thanks so much.
Always a pleasure. Good to see you, man.